Hi, I'm Bronwyn Clyde.
Hi, I'm Tom Rehn.
Hi, I'm Jenny Williams.
Hi, this is Holly Evans.
Hi, this is Bruce McAvaney, and you're listening to Hooked on Sport.
G'day there, everyone. Welcome to another bonus episode of Hooked on Sport. I'm Ben Hook. I'm joined by a great mate of mine. This is Hooky and Friends, this little segment, and we're going to be talking about the most amazing experiences he has had in AFL football. He is by far and away the hardest working person in South Australian media. You name it, he covers it, but he is an absolute delight to listen into when he's calling the footy on 5AA. If he's not already reading the news on Channel 9, it's Tom Rehn. Tom, welcome.
Hooky, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be on the podcast. You're doing great things and delighted to talk a little bit of footy and all other things as well.
Now, you're in at the studio at 5AA, I reckon at around about 5:30 in the morning, and then you're leaving the Channel 9, I beg your pardon, newsroom at around about 7 o'clock at night. There's some long days, my man.
Long days. Very fortunate, get to talk sport, which you and I do, even if we're not working. So that's great. I just love it. And I do get a bit of a break in between. So finish up at AA at about 9:15. A few hours off. I go to the gym, can't you tell? And then after that, head into 9 at about 12:30, and the rest of the day I'm there. So very fortunate. They are long days, but good understanding wife at home. So I'm extremely fortunate in that sense.
What's your favourite? Is it getting in early and reading the news? Is it doing the news and TV and Channel 9, which is a great experience? Or is it being behind the microphone for a big AFL game?
I think it's the product. I think it's the game itself. Definitely my favourite part of the week. Understand what keeps me in a job is all the, the bling that goes around it. So talking about the build-up, the injuries, the controversies like Ken Hinkley, with his aftermath in the Hawthorn game, stuff like that is what people love hearing about. But the game itself that is the most pure part. That's what I love the most, whether it's soccer, golf, football. The pure sport is what I love the most.
You've touched on something I did want to ask you about. 5AA, renowned for its post-match talkback. I mean, you would get a sense as the game's going on, my word, the fans are going to be absolutely off their tucker here, whether it's Adelaide and they've had a poor year this year, or we all remember the Brisbane Lions Port Adelaide loss that was quite significant, the crowd booing Ken off. Remarkable where they are now, and we're going to talk about that. But those experiences where you're about to head into talkback, you must be on the edge of your seat.
It's amazing. If you've had a long day and you're like, I want to get a quick out here. If the side's about to have a loss like that Brisbane one, I remember just bracing myself thinking, I'm in for an hour and a half here. Whereas if it's a win, it might only be half an hour, 40 minutes. Nothing brings out the passion than a bad loss or a really memorable win if it's, a grand final or something like that. When it's the losses, particularly with Ken, here they come, and they can come in a big way, and boy, they have this season. It's an incredible turnaround. You speak of Hooky, but they can fire up pretty quick.
We talked about the emotion of Ken Hinkley last Friday, but, for the fans as well, that stimulated state of mind can lead to some amazing talkback. We're going to talk about your time in commentary in AFL, and I want to ask you to pick out. I have a bit of a theme on my podcast, the best five. So I run with my best five news stories in sport for the week. Could be community sport, could be something right at the top end. I spoke to David Wildy a couple of days ago, the voice of the SANFL Grand Final, about his favourite SANFL Grand Finals. I wanted to catch up with you to talk about your favourite 5 AFL games that you have called. Before we get to your best 5, I want to ask you about your first one, because my recollection is you called it with one of the biggest names in footy broadcasting.
Yeah, Hooky, you're right. I mean, I did a lot of boundary for many years and then got into it probably full-time back around 2011, 2012. I'd just been to Melbourne and was doing a lot of calling with SEN, Croc Media at the time. And I reckon it was round 7, 2012. I called a game. It was Josh Jenkins. I remember it was Josh Jenkins' debut. He'd come across from Essendon. And it was at Adelaide Oval, and it was with the legendary Rex Hunt, who I grew up idolising, just made football fun. And, people will remember, Yab lad, and all the great calls, and just his ability to tell a story and to make football entertaining and fun was extraordinary. So this day was a really nice day at Adelaide Oval, at Footy Park, rather. It was back at Footy Park. Yes. And we had the booth to it.
As soon as you said 2012, I thought, I reckon this is Footy Park, but I didn't want to correct you. You were into it.
Oh, sorry, but yeah, so it was Footy Park. And I remember him just saying to me, now, young man, we're going to get along just fine as long as I'm the funny man and you are. And I said, the straight man. He goes, absolutely. And I thought, right, you got to know your place. And I wasn't going to try and be the funny guy anyway. That's my role, is to be the straight guy, let Rex do his thing. Anyway, I stand up when I call because I like to, get involved in the theatre of what's happening and really, be engaged that way. And Rex sits down, and so he's doing the intro to the game, Crows and Geelong, and he goes, "And fair dinkum, I've been working in this game for 40 years, and I've never been sitting next to a bloke who's standing and still been taller than him. Yibbida yibbida. This is the Crows versus Geelong." And we're away, and God, it was funny. But I remember the game. I said, "Now, Rex, I've got one for you today in race 5. It's at Pakenham or wherever they were running, Geelong, whatever that day." And at the start of the third quarter, the race was on, and we had all the screens on, the Crows versus Geelong game. And I think the review had just come in, and there was a contentious one. And I said, "Oh, wow, it's going to be an amazing, review here, Rex. We're going to see whether or not this is a goal to the Crows or whether or not, maybe it's going to be a rush behind. What are you thinking, Rex?" Every TV in the studio had been flicked to race 5, where I'd given him the tip, and he just nodded along and said, "Oh, yeah, Tom, it's going to be an amazing," who knows? He could not care less about it. Was all about the race, which got up. It was only a short one, about $3, I think, but that put him in a very good mood, so it made the call even better.
Oh, what a story. Amazing. We haven't even got to your best 5, and that's an absolute cracker. Let's move on, because we're going to talk about, in particular, Crows and Port Adelaide games. There's a couple, I imagine, maybe due to recency bias, but I'd like to think we've got to the semi-final. And let's just put a bit of a timestamp on this. It's Tuesday after the semi-final, so we're heading towards the preliminary finals, and you'll probably be hearing this after the preliminary final before the grand final. So there's no point previewing the preliminary finals because it'll already be won, and there's no point previewing the grand finals because we don't even know who's in it. That semi-final was amazing. We are going to get to that, but first of all, tell me, and we'll go back about 8 or 9 years, maybe one or two of your favourite games from that era when the Crows were really back, and not necessarily at the top of the pops, but certainly demonstrating that they were a competitive side in the middle of last decade.
It has to be 2015. There was a great battle, Hooky. I remember it was mid-year. It was a Saturday night game, and it was the Crows and Fremantle, and it was peak sort of Paddy Dangerfield as he was about to take off and head to Geelong. Final season there, just before, unfortunately, Phil Walsh had passed away, and then Nat Fyfe, one of the great players. And it was just this extraordinary night where the two went head-to-head, and Dangerfield had 38 possessions and a goal. Fyfe had 40 and a goal. Fyfe got the 3. Dangerfield got the 2 votes. And there was never more than a kick in it at any of the changes, any of the quarter-time breaks. And then in the end, Fremantle just overpowered the Crows to win by 11 points. But it was a phenomenal game, and one of those contests where you sat back, and just as a fan and as a viewer, you went, this is just two young men at the peak of their powers playing amazing football, and you get to enjoy the spectacle. You get a front row seat, and that was one that really sticks out. Just two brilliant players at their craft, and the coaches letting them go and saying, let's see who comes out on top. Fantastic.
Phil Walsh, the Adelaide coach, who was coaching Fremantle then?
That is a good question. That might have been, it was well past Damien Drum time, wasn't it? Might have even been past Ross Lyon, maybe? Might have even.
Okay, Ross Lyon was there by then.
I think it was maybe Ross Lyon.
Yeah. Now that starts to ring true, because I do recall that everyone was sort of saying it's amazing that Ross Lyon, maybe he's changed his ways, because in the past he would never have allowed this sort of caper to go on. Exactly.
So he obviously felt like they would have a good enough side to get it done, and they did that night. That was a rare win for Fremantle, against Adelaide at Adelaide Oval. So it was a good victory for them. But I just remember it was a great contest, and it was more about the players, those two players, than even the game itself. It was just phenomenal. But you're right. I think Ross has always been so disciplined and, regimented early days, but that was probably him just starting to free things up a little bit more, maybe.
We might move on to another game from 2015 that was, and you've touched on it, was absolutely drenched in the tragedy of the death of Phil Walsh, the coach of the Adelaide Crows at the time.
So sad, and there was so much emotion. The Crows had played the week before against West Coast. Remember, the week after it happened, I reckon the points were split. Geelong were so fantastic and magnanimous the way they said, look, let's just call this a draw. Then the Crows went to West Coast, which was a highly emotional game. I was there for 9, didn't call it, but that was a really difficult match for obvious reasons. But then the first match back was at Adelaide Oval, and they played against Port in a showdown, and the tribute pre-game, post-game was amazing. Scott Thompson won the showdown medal. They called it the Philip Walsh medal. 36 touches and a goal. Crows just hung on. They led by close to 5 goals, I think, at three-quarter time. They won by 3 points. And it was just an incredible match in terms of result, emotion, what it meant. That was a tough match in many ways for a lot of people, but it was fantastic to see how football could bring people together. There was the iconic image of David Koch and Rob Chapman. So that was a special game to be a part of and to call for me, definitely.
I can remember the West Coast game, and the Adelaide Crows players were in the middle of the ground. They had a minute's silence after the game, I seem to recall, and Adelaide footballers just sobbing uncontrollably. Patrick Dangerfield definitely foremost in my mind. I can still picture that. But I felt like that Crows-Port showdown, it sort of was a bit of healing in a way. It was almost like the celebration of Phil Walsh's life in a bizarre sort of assessment of it.
Yep. Oh, no, I think you're spot on. And it was almost a little bit cathartic for a lot of the players. And obviously it's difficult for people, even to this day, to move on. I mean, it was such a heart-wrenching and difficult story to comprehend, and still is in many ways. But you're right. I think football, and given that was such a big factor in his life, and it was a celebration of all he'd achieved with Port Adelaide, and he had an amazing record there as a senior assistant, and then at the Crows you could see what he was forming there with that group. I think it definitely helped the players in that healing, and a lot of the supporters and those close to him in that healing process.
The making of Taylor Walker, I think you would argue, with Phil Walsh. And interestingly enough, just a little footnote to that, you were the one who told me the news that Phil Walsh had passed away, because you were on air. Yeah. You were doing breakfast radio for 5AA, and you obviously knew what had gone on, but weren't able to announce it. And I was listening to the radio going, I wonder what's happened here. And it was you who broke the news to South Australia. I mean, what an eerie feeling for you.
It was bizarre. July 3rd, 2015, and it was, I think, the day, and Ben Avery came on and did the news. We knew it about 6 o'clock. We were the backup breakfast team, Mike Smithson and I, who works at Channel 7, great broadcaster, and the news came through, and we were in disbelief. So we carried on with the show because they had to make sure everyone from the family knew before we could do it out of respect. And then Ben had been given the go-ahead, so we got him on the show at about 6:45 in the morning, and it was just from there, as you can imagine, the biggest story of the year by some margin, certainly in South Australia, and one of the biggest stories in the country. Yeah, it was an eerie day, an odd day, and an unforgettable one for many reasons, but a very sad one too.
Let's go back to last Friday night, the 2024 semi-final between Hawthorn and Port Adelaide. Port weren't given a hope. They'd been beaten by 84 points the week before at the hands of Geelong at home. Hawthorn were the side that was in form, flying, and seemed destined maybe to be heading back to a grand final. You've listed it here as one of your best five. Just take me through your memories of it now.
Oh, just an amazing game, and maybe there's a bit of recency bias, but everything, the build-up, I think Ken Hinkley, I think it's fair to say they lose that game. If James Sicily's kick at the end of the game goes 1.5 metres to the right, the Hawks win, and I dare say, Hooky, Port Adelaide's on the search for a new coach. Such is the fickle nature of sport and football, and the precarious situation Ken Hinkley and the club finds itself in.
Can I just jump in here? You have a pretty good relationship with Ken Hinkley. Do you ride that emotion a little bit? Because you know him personally enough. I'm sure you don't want to see him booted out of his own job.
Yeah, I reckon I do. I probably am a bit more invested than perhaps I should be, or just perhaps, you ordinarily do. Maybe just because we have got along and I've seen him along the way, and I get along with him really well. Totally understand the reasons why fans have the opinions they do, some of them that he needs to go, and I think he's well aware. But I think you do, like, what you get to know these people, and you want them to do well. You want them to succeed. So I remember after the game, just sitting back, Timmy was wrapping it up, and I could feel myself getting emotional. And I'm not invested. I don't have anything on it.
Not a Port man, are you?
I grew up a Maggie. I'm a weird little man, as you know. Grew up a Maggie's fan. I was 8 years of age. Then the Crows came in. Started going for the Crows. Then the Power came in. I was 14. I went, well, do you go back now that Port Adelaide?
It's funny, we've known each other for a long time, and I've never known, and you've never given up, which football team you barrack for. This is breaking news.
So it's pretty sad for me. I probably have because I've been to so many Crows games and was always a Crows fan when they came in. But then Port came in, and I was like, well, I went for the Maggies, so I kind of got a foot in each. It's pathetic in a lot of ways, but I actually just love both sides. I want both to play in the grand final every year. Is that pathetic? Probably.
No, not at all. I mean, I love it, and I think if it's genuine and it's authentic, then how can you argue with it?
Yeah, and that's it. So, and once you get to know a few people, like, in the industry, and you do as well, Hooky, and, some people listening out there might have someone they know at a club, a relation, or someone that works, in the staff. It probably influences you as well. So because of that relationship, maybe with Ken, and, you get to know a few, like I got to know Travis Boak, but also got to know Taylor Walker, who, I've had a beer with a few times. So you just want them to do well. And therefore, by association, you want the team to do well. So I know, if it came to it, I don't know who I'd go for. I think I just enjoy the spectacle. I enjoy the game when they play each other. But it's funny, I've got Crows mates, and when Port are doing well, I get absolutely abused. Like, they go, "You're a Port-loving scumbag," with other colourful language. And likewise, when the Crows do well, Port mates, they absolutely say, "You can't win." And I just cop it and go, "Oh, well, that's what it is."
We could chat about that for hours. I mean, I work with a lot of Port Adelaide people, and they will say to me, "Oh, that Taylor Walker's an absolute flog." And I sort of say, look, I know you're not going to believe me, but if he walked in to this workplace tomorrow and he sat down and chatted for you, you'd love him within 5 minutes. I mean, they're all good guys, aren't they? And it's difficult when you're in media and you've got to assess them and judge them critically, and you can't be too close, I suppose. But they all get it. They all understand. I mean, they keep it maybe a little bit of distance, but yeah, you do develop relationships because out of necessity, and they're all pretty good people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? The thing I love about Tex, just on him, is he will talk to the coach, to the boot starter, to you, to me, to all the same, and he's particularly good. And we've both got young kids, Hooky. He's particularly good with kids. He's so phenomenal and generous of his time, and that just gives him a massive tick in my book.
Let's move on to the fourth of our top 5 SA's best Tommy Rehn games of AFL that he has called. And we're sticking with the Port Hawthorn theme. I thought you might have gone to the 2014 preliminary final, which was an incredible game, but we're going to stick to this year again.
Yeah, and that was the comeback where they were down by 7 goals, and then Darcy Byrne-Jones kicks the ball off the ground, 3 seconds to spare, just for the comeback. And again, as it was happening, you're thinking, they're just so out of this game. And at the time, you're thinking against Hawthorn, who are a pretty average side. But then, of course, the rest of the year plays out, and we know Hawthorn won 15 of 19 games, and 2 of their losses were this one to Port and one against GWS where they should have won. They were 28 points up. But just a great game theatre-wise. Again, maybe some recency bias, but it looks like those two sides are setting up a bit of a rivalry, which is great, given what we saw with Ginnivan and Sam Mitchell and Ken Hinkley. But just for the finish, you live for moments like that where it's really close and just exciting. Great game of footy to call, and, one of the all-time comebacks for the Power.
Were you on the mic for Byrne-Jones' goal?
I was. I think I totally lost my voice. Was number 1 rule, don't scream. I think I was screaming. And then Timmy Ginnivan, second rule, don't come in over the top. He didn't. No, he broke we both broke every rule under the book. But it was pandemonium, a lot of fun, and a great result for Port. And the fans were going wild. Those are the great stories, the comebacks that you dine out on. You can talk about, and if you can enhance it and bring it to life for people at home, with those, you don't have to work very hard to do that. But that's what it's all about.
Let's finish off with one that was before your time as a professional AFL football caller, because you were just 14 years of age. But I'm sure you probably called this one in your head and maybe inspired you to end up where you are now. But take us through the 1997 preliminary final.
One of the best games still to this day. Speaking of comebacks, it wasn't as big, but the Crows were gone for all money. They were 5-6 goals down, and then they just worked their way back into the contest off the back of, Andrew Jarman. Tony Modra did his knee at the start of the game, which was really sad. Didn't play, of course, the rest of the match or the week after against St Kilda. But the Crows were out. They were finished. And then Darren Jarman put together one of the all-time final quarters. Tony Liberatore has the hook around the body. Everyone thinks it's a goal. His teammates, they lift him up. And I remember as a 14-year-old, I went across with my cousins and my sister, and, we thought they were dead and buried. And they found a way to get back, and then Jarman puts them in front, and they hold on and win. And it was the beginning of a glorious time for the Crows. The next week, everything that happened, and then the following year. That game, though, you just remember moments. And I still remember Kane Johnson, we were sitting right in front of it, cutting out on the wing. And I remember that pass he hit to Darren Jarman to put the Crows in front. It didn't go above chest high the whole way, and it went 50 metres. It's one of the best. You know how things just stick in your mind, Hooky? It will forever be there, I think. It was just the most glorious cut out and pass to a forward on the lead. It was textbook, and the finish was equal to it. Just a beautiful passage of play and a magnificent game to be a part of.
And what an era it was to be a South Australian sports supporter, because the Adelaide 36ers were winning, the Adelaide Lightning were winning, the Adelaide Thunderbirds won back-to-back flags in 98 and 99 as well. So, yeah, remarkable stuff. Rehny, thank you. You're possibly going to be calling the grand final. If Port Adelaide make it, you are off to Melbourne. I mean, I know they've got to get through Sydney, and we don't want to do a Jack Ginnivan and put you in the MCG in 2 weeks' time, regardless of the result, but that's going to be an amazing thrill calling a GF, isn't it?
That'd be the top 5. That'd probably go to number 1 if I could.
We'll have to do a new pod.
Yeah, we'll do a new. We'll update it. That would be incredible if they could get there. What a story! I mean, you've worked as a journo Hooky for many years. Me the same. We do say it a bit, and you hear Caroline Wilson talking about it. You sometimes barrack for the story. Imagine that though, Ken Hinkley, a metre or two away from losing his job against Hawthorn, going on to win a flag. It'd just be incredible to see it. I hope it happens. Regardless, I'm looking forward to watching the GF, but to call it would be amazing. So fingers crossed it will be the Power taking it home.
Tom Rehn will be, hopefully, if the Port Adelaide Football Club is there, calling the AFL Grand Final for 5AA. He is a great mate of mine, but he's a wonderful presenter for the Channel 9 Network and also for 5AA. Appreciate his time. Rehny, thank you.
Thank you, Hooky. Great to be part of it. Look forward to doing it again and catching up on the podcast soon.